Hi, welcome back. We're going to continue our studies in Luke's Gospel, and we've reached chapter 20, starting at verse 26. Some of the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Jesus with a question. "Teacher," they said, "Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves a wife but no children, the man must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers. The first one married a woman and died childless. The second, and then the third married her, and in the same way the 7 died, leaving no children. Finally the woman died too. Now then, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since the 7 were married to her?" Jesus replied, "The people of this age marry and are given in marriage. But those who are considered worthy of taking part in the age to come, and in the resurrection from the dead, will neither marry nor be given in marriage. And they can no longer die, for they are like the angels. They are God's children, since they are children of the resurrection. But in the account of the burning bush, even Moses showed that the dead rise. For he calls the Lord the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. For to him all are alive." Some of the teachers of the law responded, "Well said, teacher," and no one dared ask him any more questions. Like last week, we have Jesus being asked questions by people who have ulterior motives. The Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection, so they don't actually care about who the woman will be married to in heaven if she's been married 7 times. They want to know if Jesus believes in resurrection or not, and they got their answer. He does. In fact, he gives quite a developed view of the resurrection. The Sadducees, I believe, were a quite elitist group. They were involved with the higher echelons of society and with the Romans. They were not extremely patriotic in the way that other groups were. And they seem not to have been overly spiritual in their faith. So they don't really believe in some of these supernatural type things like resurrection. They want to know if Jesus is on their side, or does he, like the Pharisees, believe that there is an afterlife, a life beyond this world, and a resurrection? And it's quite clear that he does. He gives a very interesting answer, that when Moses meets God in the burning bush, God is described as God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Not that he was their God, but that he is their God. So Jesus indicates from that these people are still in God's presence alive. He actually gives us great encouragement if we have lost someone we loved that belonged to God, because he says, no one is dead to him. They may have gone from the earth, we may no longer see them, but those who belong to God are alive in him still. This is where the hope that we'll be reunited with them comes from. Despite this being a discussion between 2 groups where one of them's trying to trap the other one, it's quite a sinister conversation, but despite that, actually there's a lot of encouragement for us. As I said, there's the encouragement that those who we've lost that believed are with God and they're not dead to him, even though we can't see them. But there's more encouragement here. There's encouragement for all of us that there is a resurrection. I think sometimes as Christians we're a bit embarrassed of that idea, despite it being absolutely central to everything that we believe. But Jesus describes here a real resurrection, a real physical live resurrection, not simply a metaphor or something that we can feel hopeful about but that won't happen. He really believes and explains to us that there will be a resurrection from the dead, that we belong to God and we will be with him. That's great encouragement in a week when we're worrying about the environment, when many people are talking in terrible terms. I listened to a guy this morning talking about how huge a crisis this is and how anxious he and his colleagues are that are scientists. Well, here's the reason for our hope as Christians. We believe in resurrection. Just as Jesus was the first to be raised, we believe that God will redeem those who trust in him and raise them to new life. And we believe that there'll be a new heaven and a new earth. Now, that's not to say that we just ignore this earth or don't care about it. I have no idea how the current earth relates to the resurrected or new heavens and earth. I don't know. But when Jesus was raised, his body was his body. It was him. And yet it was a new body, and it was different. It was similar and different at the same time. And so we have great hope. Despite climate apocalyptic speaking, despite great anxiety, despite sometimes Christians not seeming very sure about this core part of our faith, about this new life, this risen life, the Lord was very clear that there would be a new heavens, a new earth, a new life, a resurrection from the dead, and this is our great hope. And it doesn't devalue this life. It actually gives this life so much more meaning and purpose than if this was just it. But there's more encouragement. And it's around the area of marriage. Now, Jesus wasn't especially trying to answer about marriage, or certainly they weren't asking a question about marriage, but he gave his answer. The description he gives is of something I think they called levirate marriage, which was if a brother died and was childless, in order to continue his family line, his brother would marry the widow so that the family line could be continued. But it also served the purpose of providing support. This was long before any kind of welfare state. This was long before there was a buffer or a net to catch people when they fell on hard times. So if someone lost their husband and they didn't have anywhere else to go, there was a mechanism where they would be provided for and looked after, as well as having children and a family line. But in the story we're told that, it's a hypothetical, I believe, but 7 times this woman was remarried to one brother after the other. So which one will she be married to in the afterlife? And Jesus says, well, in the afterlife, in the new heavens, in the resurrected life, we won't be married. We won't be given in marriage any longer. This says a number of things to me. Now, marriage is a great gift from God. It's foundational. It's one of the very first things God did when he made Adam, he made Eve, and he gave them one another, and he told them to go and to be fruitful and to have children. But sometimes in the church, we can act as though marriage is the most important thing in the entire universe. In fact, for many Christian young people, marriage is the only thing they can think about often. Now, that's got to do with Christian views of sexual morality and saving yourself for getting married. So many Christian young people can't wait to get married, understandably. So it can become a bit of an idol. It can become the most important thing in the world. But actually, it isn't. It's vital. It's an incredible blessing. It is really important in the kind of stability in society. It's a great blessing for our whole society, where people have stable lives together. It's great for children. But it's not the most important thing in the world. In fact, it won't be continued into the next world. It serves a really important purpose now, but it won't be continued into the new heavens and new earth. For one reason is that we won't need more and more people to be born then. Sometimes in the church, we make marriage such a big deal and families such a big deal that we really isolate and marginalise those who are not married. And the world is full of people who are not married. There are people who have chosen to be single. There are people who haven't chosen to be single but remain single. And there are people who are divorced. Church is full of people who are not married and not with their family. And we should never make them feel that they are unimportant. In fact, great news is if you feel slightly lonely in your church because they always go on about marriage and families, be assured that this is not the pattern for the new heavens and new earth. We will be one family together, belonging to one another. It won't be about individuals and their marriages and their families. It will be the children of God, all of us, together. No one will be lonely or left out. That's great news. Maybe we could extrapolate further from this, though. We live in a society where sex is considered to be so important, one of the most important, if not the most important thing. It is used to sell absolutely everything, sometimes embarrassingly so, in adverts where you can't possibly see why they could think this is a sexy thing to sell you. But not only that, it's as if you're not sexually active, you're a non-person. It's as if you don't really exist. When I was growing up, or certainly a little bit after I was growing up, the worst insult for somebody at school was to call them a virgin. Well, why is that? The reality is that sex, sexuality, all these things are not the most important thing about us. Certainly not from a Christian perspective. They are vital, they're very important to who we are, but they're not the most important thing, just as marriage is not the most important thing. In the resurrection, that part of our life doesn't look like it's necessarily going to feature. And so for those who are celibate, for those who are voluntarily celibate or not voluntarily celibate, involuntarily celibate as they call them, for those who are single, for those who feel excluded, this is good news. You are greatly valued in the kingdom of God, and your sexual activity, your marital status are not the most important thing about you, nor are they the thing that will be important about you in the future. What is important, most important about all of us, is that we are God's creatures and God's children through Jesus Christ. That is the most important identity, the most important description of us. And that is what will last into the new world, the new heavens and the new earth. I hope for some people that will be an encouragement. And then lastly, some of the crowd shout encouragement to Jesus. Well said, teacher, they say. It's most likely that they were Pharisees, believing in the resurrection. But as the Apostle Paul will show us later, as a former Pharisee, they had no idea exactly what form God's resurrection would begin with. They were looking at the resurrection. As they looked at Jesus, they were looking at the one who would be the firstborn of the new heavens and the new earth, standing right in front of them, their greatest hope. But they didn't recognize it. May we recognize this great hope in Jesus Christ, the beginning of the new world. Amen.